Welcome back to Sip and Talk. I'm Joe.
Today, we're digging into a really interesting set of notes we received from a listener. They outline this thought experiment. It's quite fascinating, but also, frankly, a bit disturbing.
Yeah, it lays out this whole scenario, step by step, about a man and his fantasies about a woman. But it shows how these internal thoughts kind of bleed into the real world.
Yeah.
And into some pretty concerning behavior.
Exactly. So our mission today is to really unpack this scenario piece by piece. We'll use the psychological concepts mentioned in the notes to try and understand that journey from private fantasy to fixation and eventually attempts at control.
It's really about exploring where those lines are drawn, between thought and action. And what happens when someone just steamrolls right over them?
Okay, let's get into it. So the foundation, the starting point in these notes, is this idea of private fantasy. They use a specific term, E, which is defined for us as like a one-sided fantasy, often romantic or intimate. The key is that the other person hasn't consented. They might not even know it's happening.
Right, it's purely internal. And it can apparently have this connotation of being maybe excessive or, unrealistic.
So the first stage of this thought experiment asks a seemingly simple question. If this man is having these fantasies, this E, doesn't matter who he's fantasizing about, is imagining a, quote, beautiful woman as his wife different from imagining an ordinary girl?
It seems subtle, but the analysis suggests it might tell us something. Fantasizing about a beauty, maybe someone idealized, could reflect. Chasing perfection, perhaps influenced by media or culture. A kind of escape, maybe.
Whereas imagining someone more, ordinary, the notes suggest that might be closer to his actual reality, maybe based on some familiarity, even if slight, or a connection to personality rather than just an image.
Yeah, less about the impossible ideal, more about projecting onto someone maybe perceived as, more attainable or just known.
So the point here seems to be that the target of the fantasy isn't random. It could give clues about the why behind it. What's the motivation? Is it escapism? Is it projection? But crucially, at this point, it's all still in his head.
Exactly. Confined, just thoughts.
Okay, but then boom, things take a really sharp turn. The scenario adds this layer. He doesn't just imagine the beautiful woman as his wife. He starts constantly thinking, and he starts telling people publicly. He says, you see her, that beautiful woman, she's my wife. So is that still 8?
Well, the notes are clear here. The imagining part, yes, that still fits the definition. But the public declaration, that's a huge step beyond. It's not private anymore.
Right. It's entered the public sphere. It involves expression, potential interaction.
And potential consequences. The analysis points out if he knows it's false, well, that's leaning towards deception, maybe manipulation. If the woman is real and finds out, you're suddenly in the realm of moral issues, maybe even legal things like defamation or harassment.
And there's another crucial angle in the notes. What if he actually believes it? If he genuinely thinks she's his wife? Despite all evidence.
That's where the notes suggest it might shift towards something more serious, psychologically speaking.
Yeah.
Like a delusional disorder, which is very different from just having a fantasy isn't real. So yeah, that public claim, it's a massive shift.
It changes the whole dynamic.
Yeah.
From internal thought to an external act with real potential impact. And then the notes describe another escalation, a really significant one. He adds a threat, a direct threat.
Yeah. He says, if you don't marry me, I will hit you.
Chilling.
Absolutely. And the notes are unequivocal. This isn't fantasy anymore. It's not even just deception. This is straight up threats, potential violence.
The whole context shifts again, right? From maybe a psychological issue or a moral one to an immediate safety and legal concern.
Total disregard for her safety, her consent. The notes point out legally, that's a verbal threat. They mention potential crimes like intimidation, harassment, depending on the jurisdiction, obviously. But things like fines, jail time, restraining orders could come into play.
And psychologically, what does that kind of threat suggest?
Well, the notes link it to potentially deep-seated issues. Control problems, definitely. Anger management issues. Maybe personality disorders. And if he thinks the threat is somehow justified because of his fantasy belief that she should be his, well, that could tie back into that potential delusional thinking we mentioned.
So the conclusion drawn here is pretty stark, saying, I will hit you if she doesn't comply. That's a violent threat, potentially illegal. And it's worlds away from just having a fantasy.
Worlds away. It's crossed a very serious line.
Okay, so threats have been made. It's already pretty grim. But the scenario adds another twist. Now the man looks at the woman and says something like, this beauty is dressed all raggedy. And the notes ask, could this be sour grapes?
Yeah, sour grapes. The notes explain it using the old fable, right?
Right.
The fox can't reach the grapes, so he decides they were probably sour anyway. It's a psychological defense mechanism.
Right, you devalue what you can't have to make yourself feel better about not having it. Protect the ego, reduce the frustration.
Exactly. Cognitive dissonance reduction, basically.
So in this scenario, the man clearly wants this woman. He's fantasized, claimed her, threatened her. Now he's criticizing her appearance. Is he doing that because he's frustrated? Because he can't have her, so he's trying to convince himself she wasn't worth wanting.
The analysis in the notes suggests, yeah, that's definitely a possible interpretation. It fits the pattern. He desired her, he's likely frustrated by rejection or inability to possess her, and now he's finding fault. It could be him trying to soothe his own bruised ego.
But given everything else, the threats, the manipulation, is it just sour grapes?
That's the counterpoint the notes raise, and it's a really important one.
Yeah.
Given his prior behavior, criticizing her clothes might not just be about his internal feelings. It could absolutely be another tactic aimed at her.
Like trying to shame her, undermine her confidence.
Exactly. Or maybe control her by implying she needs him to look better. It could be driven by anger, resentment, or just continuing the pattern of manipulation rather than just self-soothing. The notes do say it could technically be just an observation, but context matters.
Right. In this context, highly unlikely to be neutral.
Very unlikely. So the analysis suggests it's nuanced. Maybe there's an element of sour grapes, him trying to cope internally, but it's probably tangled up with, or even secondary to, more outwardly aggressive motives. Control, shaming. Given the threats, that seems more likely to be the primary driver.
It's about whether the primary goal is soothing himself or hurting, controlling her.
Precisely. And the evidence points more towards the latter.
Okay, so the thought experiment keeps layering it on. After the threats, after the criticism, the man tries a new angle. He says, and this is pulling everything together. If you marry me, you'll be very rich. You can buy really nice clothes, and I won't hit you anymore.
Wow. Okay, so the notes really break this down as a strategic move, right? He's dangling material rewards, the wealth, the nice clothes, which directly addresses his earlier criticism about her being raggedy.
And the kicker, he explicitly ties it to stopping his own threat. And I won't hit you anymore.
Yeah. The analysis nails this as a classic control tactic, the carrot and stick. He's using the promise of good things, the carrot, and the removal of a negative he created, the stick, the threat of violence, to try and force her hand.
It completely strips away her choice, her autonomy.
Totally. And it feels like, as the notes suggest, a display of power, maybe compensating for insecurity by flashing potential wealth, positioning himself as the rescuer from the very state, raggedy, he just criticized.
Morally, legally, this feels incredibly problematic.
Oh, absolutely. The notes call it coercion, plain and simple. Using the cessation of threats, combined with promises to force compliance, that's a massive violation of respect and consent. Linking her appearance to his offer is demeaning, and actually saying, I won't hit you anymore, just reiterates the threat, keeping that intimidation potentially alive, legally speaking.
And psychologically, what does this tactic say?
It reinforces that pattern of control, doesn't it? The notes suggest deep control issues, maybe insecurity. It's about getting the desired outcome, her marrying him, through pressure and incentives, not genuine connection. And if he actually believes this should work, it really strengthens the possibility of that delusional component.
So the conclusion here is crystal clear. This isn't sour grapes. This isn't just fantasy anymore. This is calculated manipulation and coercion.
Yeah, combining bribes and threats to force a relationship. It's deeply unethical, potentially illegal, and way, way beyond the initial internal fantasy.
Which leads us to the final stage presented in these notes. So the man sees the woman actually dating someone else, and predictably, he gets furious.
Intense anger. And then he tries one last pitch, it seems. Something like, hey, why not try dating me? Look, I'm handsome, I've improved myself, I can take you out for good food.
Still focused on the superficial, the external.
Right. And her response, according to the scenario in the notes, is very direct, very simple. She says, why don't we just maintain the status quo?
Basically, no thanks. Things are fine as they are without you involved romantically. A clear boundary.
A very clear refusal. And his reaction to this final, unambiguous rejection.
Intense anger again. Yeah. And then this declaration, you will marry me eventually. This is historical inevitability. Any obstacles to our marriage, that's just our families opposing it.
Wow. Okay, so the analysis in the notes really dives into this, that anger. Likely fueled by jealousy, seeing her with someone else, possessiveness, that ingrained belief she somehow belongs to him, and just sheer frustration that nothing worked.
Often linked to insecurity, right? A fragile ego that can't handle rejection.
Exactly. And that final pitch, handsome, improved, good food. It's just more of the same manipulation using external things, driven by likely competition now that he sees someone else.
Her maintain the status quo response is just setting a boundary, asserting her autonomy.
Which he completely ignores. That declaration, historical inevitability. The notes highlight this as a profound refusal to accept reality.
It sounds obsessive, delusional almost.
Very much so. The analysis explicitly brings up obsession and a likely delusional tendency. It even mentions the possibility of something like erotomanic delusion, that fixed false belief someone is in love with you or destined for you, despite all evidence, like her literally rejecting him and dating someone else.
And blaming the families. It's just our families opposing.
Classic external attribution, according to the notes. He can't accept it's her choice or his behavior or the lack of any actual relationship. So he blames outside forces. It's a way to avoid responsibility and maintain his fixed belief system.
So the final picture the notes paint is pretty disturbing. A combination of insecurity, extreme control issues, and potential delusion.
Yeah, the whole escalating pattern, fantasy, claims, threats, devaluation, manipulation, and now this angry denial of reality and claiming inevitability. It shows this deeply unhealthy, immoral, and frankly, potentially dangerous obsession that just completely disregards her existence as an independent person with rights and feelings.
It's like the fantasy didn't just leak out, it completely took over his perception of reality.
Fueled by that need for control and a total inability to accept no.
So this thought experiment, drawing from these listener notes, it really maps out a frightening progression, doesn't it? From something seemingly harmless, a private thought, escalating all the way to public threats, coercion, and a complete break from reality.
It's a powerful illustration of how unchecked fixation, especially when it's tangled up with possessiveness, insecurity, and that need for control, can spiral outwards. It becomes behavior that isn't just inappropriate, it's genuinely harmful, manipulative, and potentially illegal. It just obliterates personal boundaries.
And the analysis provided in the notes gives us some language for this, right? We see the difference between fantasy and delusion, that critical shift from internal to external action. We see concepts like coercion, manipulation, maybe defense mechanisms like sour grapes or external attribution playing out.
Right. And this whole narrative of the delusional man, as the analysis seems to suggest he might be, it just underscores how vital consent and respecting boundaries are. It highlights the real danger when someone's internal desires completely override their perception of external reality, especially when that leads them to try and control or harm someone else.
So thinking about this for you, the listener, what's the takeaway? This thought experiment serves as a stark reminder, maybe, of how control and manipulation can manifest, sometimes starting subtly and escalating. It gives a framework for thinking about when someone's internal world starts dictating their external actions in ways that disregard others.
Yeah, fantasy is one thing, a normal part of being human. But confusing it with reality and then acting on that confusion in ways that violate someone else's autonomy and safety, that's something entirely different. And in this analogy, this man represents the current Chinese Communist Party, the CCP.
Got it. Yeah, okay.
He fantasizes she's his wife, tells everyone they will eventually marry.
So that mirrors the CCP claim about Taiwan being part of China and unification being, like, inevitable.
Precisely. And he also tells everyone constantly that she originally belonged to him.
Which sounds exactly like the official narrative, the propaganda, that Taiwan's always been an inseparable part of China.
Right. And then there's this part. He gets really angry, furious even, when he sees her interacting with others. Dating, for instance.
Yeah, that really jumped out. It's like the CCP reacting strongly when Taiwan engages with other countries, especially the U.S.
They see it as a challenge, almost like a personal affront, not just normal international relations.
And the tactics. It mentions using both threats and temptations.
Yes. Like saying, marry me or I'll hit you, but also marry me and you'll be rich.
So that's the analogy for the military pressure and the economic incentives towards Taiwan.
That's the comparison drawn, yeah. The military coercion on one hand, the economic inducements on the other.
Okay, so if the man is the CCP, who's the woman in this thought experiment?
The woman represents Taiwan, and crucially, she acts like an independent person.
Her stance is basically, let's just keep things as they are, maintain the status quo.
Exactly. Which, reflects Taiwan's position pretty well, wanting autonomy, rejecting this imposed future.
A distinct entity that just wants to live its life, essentially.
Yeah, and she knows she needs to protect herself from his pressure. She rejects his will. That self-protection part is key.
So let's cut to the chase here. The core point The notes called it the breaking point or sabala. What's the explicit conclusion of this thought experiment?
It states it plainly. The man is the current CCP. The woman is Taiwan.
Okay.
And the main takeaway is that Taiwan operates as an independent entity now. And its people don't want this forced unity, this imposed will. It's presented as a demand from the CCP, not a negotiation.
Wow, okay. That really lays bare the conflict. So, thinking about the conclusion time aspect, what core mentalities does this analogy highlight?
For the CCP side, it really points to, well, obsession, maybe delusion, even this belief in historical inevitability that ignores Taiwan's current reality and democratic way.
And the desire for control through the military and economic stuff.
Definitely. Plus, blaming others, the U.S., Taiwan independence forces, instead of acknowledging Taiwan's own agency and that sort of jealousy and anger about Taiwan's international connections.
And for Taiwan, what does the analogy emphasize there?
Autonomy. The fact that the mainstream view in Taiwan supports the status quo, its de facto independence. And because of the pressure, the focus is squarely on self-protection.
Right. Strengthening defenses, seeking international support from democracies.
Exactly. And the source notes touch on the moral angle, too, the ethics of trying to force your will on a democratic population that wants self-determination.
Which clashes with the reality on the ground, Taiwan having its own government, military, never being ruled by the CCP, versus the CCP's historical claims and the complex international diplomatic dance.
Yeah, the whole one China policy versus the de facto reality.
So this leads to the big takeaways from the source, right?
Yeah.
What are they telling us based on this analogy?
2 main points. First, Taiwanese must protect themselves.
And we see that happening, don't we? Increased defense spending, like that $21 billion figure for 2025, building their own weapons, working with the U.S.
It underscores that defense, economic resilience, and international support are crucial for Taiwan to resist that pressure.
Okay, and the second takeaway?
It's aimed the other way. Chinese must recognize reality.
The reality being Taiwan's independence in practice and the strong public opinion against forced unity and the risks involved.
Yes. Though the analysis also notes realistically how hard it is for people in mainland China to get unbiased information because of censorship and propaganda. That's a huge challenge.
So, wrapping up the overall conclusion from this analogy in the source.
It powerfully shows this clash. Taiwan's desire for self-determination versus the CCP's imposed will, driven by what the analogy portrays as obsession and control. Taiwan is independent, seeking to protect itself, and resolving it is incredibly tricky, tangled up in geopolitics and ideology.
It really shows how an analogy, even a simple one, can clarify such complex dynamics.
Definitely. And it leaves you, the listener, with this thought. When you have groups holding such fundamentally different views of reality, shaped so much by information access and ideology, what does that really mean for finding any kind of peaceful resolution?
That's definitely something to chew on. If you found this deep dive useful, please do subscribe to Sip and Talk so you don't miss our next one.
And hey, before we forget, got to give a shout out to our buddy Micky.
I love that he's staying true to himself while exploring this new creative outlet. It's inspiring.
It really is. So to all our listeners out there, do yourselves a favor and check out Micky's YouTube channel. You won't be disappointed.